Zampola. Welcome to Bhutan e-learning program. I am Ugenwang Mutenzin of Motitang High Secondary School. This is an environmental science lesson of Key Stage 5 for classes 11 and 12. Now before we start our lesson, let me play a short video so that you can guess the topic of our lesson today. While watching the video, I would like you to carefully observe and note down all the details of what you see in the video. Are you ready? Let's start. Well students, now that you saw the video, let us check if you and I have identified the similar kind of details. In the beginning of the video, we first saw a beautiful forest that is an ecosystem. Then we saw the forest being disturbed by a wildfire. After the forest fire, we observed certain time lapse during which the forest or the ecosystem experiences a rejuvenation period. With time, we slowly observe that the forest or the ecosystem is re-established, and eventually we get to see a new ecosystem which is similar but different from the initial ecosystem. I hope and expect that you made the similar kind of observation as I did after watching the video. It is now not very difficult for you to guess the topic of our lesson today by understanding what you saw in the video. Yes, we are going to discuss on disturbances and ecological succession. Let me repeat, we are going to discuss on the topic disturbances and ecological succession. Now before we start our lesson, it is very important for you to understand the lesson objectives. By the end of the lesson, you should be able to 1. Explain ecological disturbance, 2. Discuss the consequences of ecological disturbance to the ecosystem. 3. Explain the causes of ecological succession. And 4. Analyze the type of ecological succession prevailing in your area. Well students, I hope now you are clear with our lesson objectives. Let us start our lesson by understanding what is an ecological disturbance. Well, ecological disturbance refers to an event of intense environmental stress occurring over a relatively short period of time, causing changes in an affected ecosystem. Or in simple words, we can also define ecological disturbance as a temporary change in the environmental conditions that causes a pronounced change in the ecosystem. Disturbance can result from a natural cause or from the activities of humans. Therefore, there are two types of disturbances: A. Natural disturbance, and B. Anthropogenic disturbance. Under natural disturbances, we see events like wildfire, drought, landslides, and volcanic activity. Similarly, under anthropogenic disturbances, we see events like clear-cutting of forests, mining activities, introduction of invasive species, and many more. Let me ask you one question. Can you think of some other examples of natural and anthropogenic disturbances? Very good. Now that you know about various types of disturbances, it is very important that you understand that the ecological disturbances can change the equilibrium of ecosystem and communities and can also change the size of species population. severe disturbances to the ecosystem can cause permanent changes and it can lead to ecological succession. Now, the next question that we will have is, what is an ecological succession? Well, let us go with the definition of ecological succession. Ecological succession is defined as a process by which an ecological community undergoes gradual and progressive change following a disturbance or after the initial colonization of a new habitat. Let us look into the basic steps that is identified in the process of ecological succession. There are 7 basic steps. Let us go through each one of the steps first. Number 1, we have nudation. Number 2, we have invasion or migration. Number 3, we have HSS, which we also call it as establishment. Number 4, we have aggregation. Number 5, we have competition. The 6th step is called as reaction. And the 7th step is known as stabilization, or we can also call it as the climax stage. Now let us look into what happens during each one of the following processes. We will start with nudation first. In this process, there is a development of a barren area without any form of life. The barren area may be developed due to topographic factors, like we have volcanic activity, we have wind actions, we have soil erosions, or it can be developed due to climatic factors, like we have storms, hail, fire, or it can also be developed due to biotic factors like the human activities or epidemics and many more. The second process or the step identified in ecological succession is invasion, or we can also call it as migration. If species reach a barren area from any other area, then we call it as invasion. But when the species like the seeds, the spores, the plant propagules, they are carried by agents like water, air, or any other species, then we call it as migration. The third process in the ecological succession is called as HSS. After the species reach the barren area, then there is successful establishment of the species as a result of adjustment with the prevailing conditions of an area. If the establishment is complete, the species will reproduce sexually in that particular area. Therefore, HSS is also known as establishment process. The fourth process is known as aggregation. After the successful establishment of the species in that particular area, then reproduction will begin. During the process of reproduction, the population size of species increases. The species of the population in the community, they come closer to each other. The fifth process is known as competition. Now, when the population size of species increases, it leads to 2 types of competition. We have intraspecific competition and we have interspecific competition. Now, the competition is for the resources which they share, like we have air, space, nutrient, radiant energy, and many more. Now, when we are talking about intraspecific competition, we are talking about competition that takes place between individuals of similar species. Whereas when we are talking about interspecific competition, we are talking about competition among individuals of different species sharing the same resources. Now, the 6th very important step is known as the reaction step or the reaction process. Now, during reaction process, the species in the area will modify their environment through the interactions and by replacing the community by another species community. And the final step we have is the stabilization, which we can also call it as the climax stage. During this process, there is final establishment of the community. Thus, we call it as the stabilization process. The establishment of the community maintains itself in equilibrium with the climax of the area, and it is not replaced by any other community, and we can refer to such type of community as the climax community. Well, I have another question for you. Can you recall all the 7 steps identified in the process of ecological succession? All right, students. Now that we have identified the 7 steps involved in the process of ecological succession, let us discuss about the classifications of ecological succession. Now, we can classify ecological succession based on various factors. Now, if we talk about the factors, like on the basis of inhabitation of an area, there are 2 types of ecological succession. Number 1, we have primary succession, and the second, we have secondary succession. Let us discuss about primary succession first. During primary succession, it occurs in a new uninhabited area that has little or no soil at all. Now, let me show you how primary succession occurs. A volcanic eruption may destroy a very large area. Second, you can see that the lava from the volcanic eruption cools down to create a new land without soil. Over time, you will see that the soil or the dirt is formed. Once the soil is formed, you will see the plants will gradually grow. And once the plant starts to grow, we will eventually see a forest or a grassland may return. Now, the first species that colonizes this new land is called as the pioneer species, and the community as pioneer community. Lichens and mosses are many a times pioneer community because these species, they are tolerant to hostile environment while the other species are not. They create suitable environment for new organisms as well as support the continuity of ecological succession. Next, the second main type of ecological succession is known as the secondary succession. Secondary succession occurs when an existing ecosystem has been destroyed or has been disturbed. It is minor in magnitude compared to primary succession. Let us look into an example of secondary succession. A forest fire may destroy a very large areas of trees and plants. Or we can also say that a flooding may destroy an area. In this before and after picture, we can see that the disturbances may destroy the ecosystem, but the soil still remains. So gradually, the forest or the ecosystem is reestablished. Now let me show you how the secondary succession may occur. First, we see an established ecosystem. Then we see that the ecosystem experiences a wildfire. The fire leaves behind empty but not destroyed soil. With time, grasses and other small plants starts to grow, establishing a pioneer community. Then we will see small bushes and trees starts to colonize the area. Next, fast-growing evergreen trees develop to the fullest, while the shade-tolerant trees, they develop underneath. Here, the community is advancing or transitioning towards a new community. Therefore, such type of community can also be referred to as serial community. Eventually, we will see larger deciduous trees will grow over them, and similar type of ecosystem will develop or will establish, which is more healthy compared to the initial ecosystem, which is more stable compared to the previous ecosystem. Therefore, such type of ecosystem is known as the climax community. Now, apart from primary and secondary succession, we can also classify ecological succession on the basis of initiating cause, we have two types of ecological succession. Number one, we have autogenic succession. In this type of ecological succession, we will see interactions between living organisms, or we can just say that the succession occurs due to biotic factors within the community. These species, they modify the community, leading to replacement of old community by a new community. For example, in a forest ecosystem, the larger trees, they produce broader leaves, providing shade to the forest floor area. It affects the shrubs and the herbs growing underneath, which requires more light, but then it supports the shade-tolerant species to grow well. The second type of ecological succession on the basis of initiating cause is allogenic succession. It is a type of succession which is initiated by the changes in the environmental conditions brought by physical processes, or we can say due to the abiotic factors like soil erosion, volcanic activities, leaching, and many more. Let me give you an example. In a forest ecosystem again, soil erosion and nutrient leaching can alter the nutrient value of soil, leading to change of vegetation in that area. Next classification is on the basis of organisms that dominate the earlier stages of ecological succession. Under this, we have again two more types of succession. Number one, we have autotrophic succession. In autotrophic succession, we see that the plants, which is also referred to as the autotrophs, they dominate the earlier stages of succession. The second type, as I mentioned, heterotrophic succession. It is a type of succession in which the heterotrophic organisms, can you remember what are the heterotrophic organisms? Alright, we have organisms like bacteria, fungi, animals, and many more which dominate the initial stages of ecological succession. Now, when we are talking about the dominant species, now this dominant species will continue ecological succession only in an organic environment. Now, finally, on the basis of the nature of habitat, we can also classify ecological succession into various types. Number one, we have hydrosphere. If succession occurs in an aquatic habitat with plenty of water. Number two, we have halosphere. That is, if succession occurs in a saline soil or water. Then we have number three, xerosphere. That is, if succession occurs on a dry, bare land that is limited by water scarcity. Under xerosphere, we have again two more classifications of ecological succession. Number one, we have lithosphere. That is succession occurring on barren rocks. Number two, we have samosphere, which is succession occurring on sandy habitats. Well, now that we have come to the end of our lesson, I hope that you understood the main concept of what we have discussed in our lesson today. Now, to briefly summarize what we have studied so far, let us just make an understanding that ecological succession may be initiated either by formation of a new unoccupied habitat, such from a lava flow or from a severe landslide. Or we can also say that ecological succession may be initiated on an already established ecosystem by some sudden ecological disturbances like wildfire, severe climatic actions, flooding, etc. So in either of the cases, ecological succession involves a progression of communities with lower species diversity, which may be less stable, to communities with higher species diversity, which may be more stable. Now, when we say more stable community, we are talking in terms of energy flow, we are talking in terms of species interaction, we are talking about a resilient ecosystem. Okay, now that we have come to end of our lesson, and before I say goodbye to you, I would like you to explore answers for these 3 simple questions related to our lesson today. Number 1, how do major and minor ecological disturbances affect ecological succession? Number 2, what are the advantages of ecological succession to the community? And number 3, this we have to do it practically. Identify a site in your locality and describe the type of ecological succession. With this, thank you for your attention, and I will see you in my next lesson.